Now what? You've done Christmas. You did your shopping. You did your giving. You did your eating. Now what? Where to from here? Yeah, it's a good thing that New Year's comes right after Christmas, because you can think of all the stuff you need to do, hopefully, in the light of the warmth and affirmation that comes from Christmas. It's very clear in the gospel stories that Matthew and Luke, who tell us the Christmas stories, they have no intention of providing simply an engaging tale. Oh, that's a cool story. Wow, great. They're not wanting that reaction. Their intention is to set us up to ask, now what? Given this, what next? And when you read the Gospels, you feel yourself being pulled. What? Because it's clear that these are not tales to entertain, though they are entertaining. The Bible writers imagine they're telling a story of transformation. And I'm especially intrigued with Luke, the way Luke structures his telling of the Jesus story. So he tells us about the birth of Jesus and the shepherds out on the dark night hillside and the angels that come and ambush them there with good news. Luke tells about the parents of Jesus going into the temple and having this interaction with Simeon, the old priest, who takes the baby and says, Now I have seen the salvation of my people. He had pretty sharp eyes. My granddaughter is at our house, some of you know. And I must say, she does not look like salvation. She looks like work. The coolest thing about having grandkids is when you hear the baby cry, you go and tell mom. Katrina, I think Kyra is protesting. It's amazing. It's really cool. But it does. Simeon looked at that child and said, I have seen the salvation of humanity, of God's people. Finally, Luke gets done with the childhood tales, the stories of the boy Jesus. He's done with it. Let's get on with the real thing, the ministry that Jesus has come to perform, the work of significance that he's here for. And Luke does not begin by talking about Jesus. Instead, he begins by talking about the ministry of John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, who is apparently a riveting preacher. Thousands come to hear him. The whole nation is stirred, hanging on every word he has to say. And at some point, as the people are caught up in the vision that John the Baptist has pictured of a new world, a good society, the Messianic age, they go, what do we do? We hear you. It's beautiful. It's calling our hearts. So what do we do? Now what? I used to tell people the only question in theology that really grabbed me is the question, so what? Spin all the theories you want. So what? How does that affect my life here and now? How does that affect my interaction with people I like and maybe especially people I don't like? So this is just another version, I guess, of the same question. Now what? You have carried me this far, and I've been happy to be carried to here. John, you've grabbed me. You've stirred my soul. Now what? And I'm intrigued with what comes next. If you know the history of Christianity, you would expect what comes next not to come from the mouth of John the Baptist. You would expect this to come from the mouth of Jesus. And it would be easy to forget who you're hearing because it readily would fall from the mouth of Jesus. But Luke does not put these words in the mouth of Jesus. And I think the reason he doesn't is he's wanting to make it clear to us that when Jesus says stuff like this, Jesus is not inventing something new. Jesus is merely the final, most compelling declaration of what God has been saying all along. If what Jesus said was genuinely, radically new, it would really not have much place in the Bible the way it does. The Bible makes it clear that Jesus is the final, the final flowering of what God's people have been wrestling with and thinking about and contemplating thousands of years. And John the Baptist helps us set us up for that. Now what? Okay, the Messianic age is here. Hope is alive and it's realistic. Now what? And John says, it's really complicated. If you've got two shirts, find somebody who doesn't have one. Real complicated. It's not complicated until you try to do it. And then you say, but I might need that shirt tomorrow. It is a daunting challenge. And I don't mean to suggest that it is not simple. It takes all of the wisdom God has given you and perhaps more, all the wisdom God has given us and perhaps more to know how to live this out. But it is vital for us as we move from Christmas into life that we carry this compelling vision that John the Baptist articulates right here before Luke even lets us hear Jesus say the first word. If the Messianic age is here, if Jesus is real, if God is alive, what does that mean? If you've got two shirts, share one. The tax collectors came and they said, so what do we do? Here's where you have to work with the story a little bit. If you were to read this story and you read tax collector and you think, oh, I know that. That's the IRS agent or the agency, the IRS. I think you would miss it. The structural similarities really don't work. It would be better to imagine the tax collectors as those entities which have sufficient power to use the government to enrich themselves. And typically that's not individuals. Sometimes it is. Typically it's more often corporations or nonprofits, special interest groups. But it's groups of people who've come together and that's appropriate. They come together and they try to shape how government works. But when I use my power, and whether I'm speaking individually or corporately as the head of an organization, when I use my power to shape the government so that it will enrich me or us, speaking in a narrow us, we're doing what the tax collectors did. We will need to make sure that these kinds of social systems Distribute rather than gather, rather than concentrate. And finally, you come to the soldiers. And the best parallel there would be police forces today. This was an occupying army. They were not at war, but they were the people with power. And really, it's the same picture. He said, don't use the power that you have to advantage yourself at the expense of others. Don't threaten somebody, a little payola under the table, or I will take you to court, and because I'm the policeman, I win. Because I have the power to influence the judge, I win. John's vision is expressed individually, but it is a radical vision of a society that operates on principles of justice. If we are followers or devotees of Jesus Christ, which means we are also devotees of the prophetic vision that is voiced in Scripture from the beginning all through, then we will need to be radically committed to asking the question, how do we structure our life together to achieve the vision that God advanced in Jesus Christ? What vision was that? Micah chapter 4 says it well. We could multiply the references in the prophets in the Old Testament. What's God's vision? When God looks at the new year, what would He like to see? Micah chapter 4. They will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Just recently read about the death of Mr. Kalashnikov, and heard a discussion of how many Kalashnikov rifles there are in the world. There's a lot of them. God's vision is that the guns, the instruments of destruction, would turn into the instruments of production. The instruments of healing would turn into the instruments of harming would turn into the instruments of healing. And you don't get there with just a no-brainer and with slogans. I'm not meaning to reduce the challenges that we face to bumper sticker stuff. We can't. But as a community, as the community of Jesus, we are called to keep this vision alive and to drive ourselves and the world around us to ask the question, can we get closer to this? And the answer is almost always, yes, if we will. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Every man will sit under his own fig tree, under his own vine, under his own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. Wow. What if we just lived with that vision for a year? If you're an engineer, how does this story, how does this vision affect your life? If you're a mathematician, how are you using the brain power God gave you to build a world closer to God's vision? If you're an economist, if you're a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, if you're retired, what baby step could you take in that direction this year? Now, to me, it's important, especially I say in the light of Christmas. Let's bring a little good cheer to this, because this can get pretty heavy. Oh man, save the world. That's heavy. I hope this is not irreverent. But think for just a minute. This vision of Micah chapter 4. It says God is going to make sure that finally we get to the place and the swords turn into plowshares and They won't learn war anymore, and peace is going to... This is God's vision. Articulated by Micah, say, 2,500 years ago. This is not just Micah's vision. Scripture insists this is God's vision. How's God doing? The reality is, a lot of us don't understand that God is doing better than we think. War has, in fact, declined. There's far less war now than there was 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago. If you're talking about per capita, the amount of people engaged in the process of killing is much less now. But it's still horribly excessive. Fewer people, percentage-wise, starve to death now than 100 years ago. But is the world fixed? Of course not. So it's taken God a while to do what he said. So if you're not able to accomplish world peace this year, don't beat yourself up. But please, let's make sure that we are cooperating with God and moving his direction. Let's ask what we can do to make this world more like the vision of God. As Andreas talked, 3 weeks ago now, Andreas? Talked about Christian orthodoxy, this belief that God was in Jesus. This baby was the divine presence. And he talked about some of what that means. God did not stare at the problems of the world and from some great distance address it. He became part of this world. He joined us. Now what? We who carry the image of God are called to be equally engaged with humanity, to see in every baby's face the glory of God, to see in the difficulties of everyone, my difficulties, our difficulties. You don't have a shirt? Whoa! I don't have a shirt. You live in Central Africa Republic and life is hell? That's not just there. I don't know. I have no imagination even how we would address that. But it seems to me that those who claim to be brilliant and smart, and especially if you're not old yet, somebody needs to find an answer. Somebody needs to find a way to make it better. That's the message of Christmas moving into the new year. It seems to me that great gifts convey responsibilities. Maybe responsibility is the wrong word, but somehow they give us summons. Remember years ago, somebody gave me an ancient, massive Arabic Bible. And just, oh, would you like this? And I was still young enough then, I was collecting. Here's a book for my collection. And it was, I didn't know where you would even find such a thing. This ancient, massive Bible in Arabic. How do you respond to a gift like that? The guy that gave it to me, he was old. He was at a stage in life where he was distributing rather than gathering. So he has taken this treasure, which at this stage of my life I understand, this stuff that's occupying a shelf. He took this treasure and he placed it in my hands. Now what do I do? Well, so I set about to learn Arabic so I could read this Bible that he had given me. A great gift calls for some engagement, some response. Ha ha ha. Yeah, My little ice shoes. That calls for a response. Yeah. Aren't those cool looking things, man? Yeah. Boy, this is so cool. I suppose that if I took these and hung them on my wall, that would show some level of respect for the gift, a woefully inadequate demonstration of respect. These cost good money. They weren't cheap. Calls for the next chapter to be written. I'm eager to do it. God gave us the best of heaven in Jesus Christ. We as Christians have said, yes, that's true. That gift was to us. And now we are called to write the next chapter. To take the gift of heaven and to pay it forward in the world.